We will now move our attention to Unit 6, Revolutions Reloaded, and check out that cool Matrix background. In the 1700s, Latin America, comprising of Central and South America, was a region of various nationalities, colonies, and classes. The different classes had very little in common. The whites, the mixed races, slaves, and others lacked unity. As the ideals of the Enlightenment spread from Europe to their American colonies, young Creoles, like Simon Bolivar, read the works of philosophers such as Voltaire and Rousseau. Many of these Creoles traveled to Europe for their education or for war. In time, they brought their revolutionary ideas back to Latin America and were later inspired by the American Revolution. Then, the French Revolution erupted in 1789, but it was the Peninsular War that raged from 1808 to 1814 that set the Latin American revolutions in motion. It was Spain that was mostly in control of Latin America, and when a loyalist revolution broke out against Napoleon's brother, who was placed on the throne, it forced the Spanish and the French to return thousands of troops that were garrisoned throughout the colonies and to focus their attention on Europe. The lack of a military presence in the colonies provided the spark that ignited the many revolutions for freedom in that region. So we will break up this unit into 3 different parts. The first one being on cultural diffusion. So let's look at a little vocabulary. First off, cultural diffusion is the process of the spread of a feature or trend from one place to another over time. Now, under diffusion, we can take a look at 2 different types. The first one is expansion diffusion, where an innovation or idea develops in a source area and remains strong there. Now, the source area can be called a hearth. Now, it stays strong there while also spreading outward. With expansion diffusion, the people stay put, and the information, idea, trait, or disease does the moving. Now, under expansion diffusion, there are 3 types of diffusion we can use as subsets. So let's look at the first one, contagious diffusion. That's when a particular characteristic is rapidly transmitted throughout the population. In this form of expansion diffusion, most adjacent individuals will be affected. An example of contagious diffusion is how the bubonic plague spread from Italy throughout Europe in the mid-1300s. Another example is the initial spread of Islam from its hearth, or place of origin, from Mecca in Arabia, and then on to the Middle East and throughout North Africa. Now, while Islam is a religion and clearly not a disease, the manner in which it spread was contagious in nature. Also under expansion diffusion is hierarchical diffusion. Now, this occurs when the main channel of diffusion spreads to those who are most linked, most susceptible, or most likely to adopt what is being diffused. So an example of hierarchical diffusion can be seen through the spread of Enlightenment thought through the people who would have had more contact with Europeans, such as those in the Latin American colonies. This is a major reason why revolutions broke out in the Americas and why revolutions did not break out in Central Africa, for example. Now, another example could be fax machines. They spread in this fashion, first making their way to large corporations who could afford them, initially in the 1960s, then to smaller businesses, and eventually to individuals as the prices dropped. Another modern example would be the diffusion of Crocs. Starting as a small company in Boulder, Colorado in the early 2000s, they initially sold their footwear to boaters. Then gardeners picked up on them until they became an American and eventually a worldwide phenomenon. Now the third type of expansion diffusion, and sometimes for some people the hardest to wrap their head around, is stimulus diffusion. Now this occurs with the spreading of an underlying principle or idea. Now some ideas take time to make an impact, such as how the values of the Enlightenment spread over time and eventually led to revolutions and the spread of democracies. Not all ideas can be readily adopted. Some are just too vague, too different, or impractical for immediate adoption. A modern example can be seen with fast food chains such as McDonald's selling hamburgers worldwide. Since the Hindu religion prevalent in India prohibits the consumption of beef, burgers were adapted to include vegetables, lamb, or even chicken. As an example, you can see the Maharaja Mac. Now, Maharaja means basically great king.